together as mediators and trainers really for quite some time. Tracy's background is as a business corporate tax lawyer. It's always amazed me that she knows how to go through those IRS codes and books like that. It's a real turn on sometimes to hear her talk about it.
Which is why we're going to talk about numbers today.
Yeah.
It's a really weird guy.
Yeah.
And over the years, I think both of us have been getting into this stuff relatively about the same time, probably for different reasons. One of our experiences, which really has led us to come here, and we were involved yesterday with a presentation, we'll talk about that in a moment or two, was the fact that we've had some experiences both in Michigan and around the country and in the world as well, with the development of mediation and seeing where it is at different stages, seeing how different cultures look at it, how they look at different conflict resolution, and how even within certain geographical areas like Chicago, where you can have a very advanced group or advanced thinking group about mediation, while outside these doors and down the street at the Cook County Courthouse and in some of the big tall buildings around here, there are people who just have no idea what you're talking about. And when they talk to you about mediation, they say, well, what happens if we don't like your decision? But we were involved in Michigan in developing a mediation training program, a 40-hour training program there for the University of Michigan Continuing Legal Education Institute. I think largely because of Tracy's international notoriety, we were able to pull off some kind of a best course award for CLE on that program. We've been very happy about it. And I think it's probably very comparable to what you're doing here, so we really didn't reinvent anything. We just happened to get a little bit, capture a little bit of the attention. And as we looked upon your boards here, you know, it's very much what we do. So, Tracy mediates all kinds of cases. She's done domestic training, she's done the 40-hour training, she's a full-time mediator and arbitrator. She has a wonderful father with whom she practiced law for quite some time, of 50 years duration. Not that she's
mine.
50. She was a child.
Mine was only 48.
So she's an author, she's a lecturer, she's...
Enough.
Okay.
I am here because of this man right here.
That's why I wanted to set the context. Build her up so when you hear talking.
When he joined our law firm back in the 90s, he had a vision, and through that vision, we have made a huge difference in Michigan, and it's partly because Steve went out into the world and found people with like hearts and like minds. He's a founding member of the International Academy of Mediators.
Which he's the president of the
Well, because he's a past president.
a little,
There's a lot of symbiotic relationship here, but Steve is also a full-time mediator and arbitrator, and got the courage to step out on his own and build his own practice, and left his client base behind, and is out there now walking in 2 camps, and has the great fortune of traveling all sorts of wonderful places. And you may think what you want about Youngstown, but when you go to Youngstown to mediate a case with 13 plaintiffs for 2.5 days, that gives you a perspective about what we do that's quite different than just sitting in a room with 1 or 2 people or 1 or 2 lawyers trying to hammer out a contract case. I have learned much from him. I continue to learn from him, and my hope for you today is that you'll take away some nuggets that we can share with you so that you can go on and continue your quest, because as Steve said, you are really in an underdeveloped market, and one of the things that's interesting to us coming into your market is where you are in the status of excellence. Michigan, much like Cook County, was way behind the rest of the country in establishing court annexed programs and even accepting ADR, let alone mediation, into its legal culture. And one of the benefits of being at the end of the development of that is you learn from all the other states and all the experiences that they had, so that when you start at a higher level. Your learning curve is faster. Similarly here, you are already at the top of the learning curve and going up. It's the people that you're going to encounter who aren't there yet. So part of what we bring to you today is a recognition and a congratulations to each of you for taking this into your lives and making a difference and wanting to excel, and then giving you what we think are some of the state-of-the-art things that are happening in mediation that's going to propel you even further, but hopefully you'll be bringing some followers with you so that you'll all get to the top of the pyramid in good time. What we thought we would do today is begin a little bit with sort of a class survey so we understand who you are and why you're here. And then we're going to do a case study. We're going to talk about impasse breaking techniques today, sort of metaphorically. Everything we're doing today in the training is related to what we do as mediators, either consciously or subconsciously. So we're going to work on a case study. We'll give you a chance to read it. We're going to break you up into small groups with an assignment to work on some things. And then we're going to come back and we're going to debrief the experiences there. And that will probably take us maybe to lunchtime. And I'm happy to report that lunch is going to come around 12 o'clock. I think Stephanie told us we're going to have some pizza, so that's good. So we'll take a break and have a little bit of lunch. And then we're going to come back and talk about negotiating money and some techniques for negotiating money. And then toward the end of the day, when we're all getting kind of tired and worn out, we want to hear from you what your issues and your problems and your concerns are.
Actually, that's why we've left it to the end, because you'll be pretty tired and you won't ask us challenging questions.
We want to know what bothers you, things that stump you, and concerns that you have, and engage in a real productive dialogue. We always learn more from you than we have to share. So that's kind of our plan today. It's very informal. We want you to ask questions. We want you to feel free to get up and get drinks and be relaxed. This is not boot camp.
One of the things I'll just bring to your attention is what we did yesterday was to present a program to a number of judges and lawyers over at Holland tonight, and the title of it was, and you might like this from a mediation standpoint because it really isn't the concept, but in order to gain an entry into lawyer psychology, we had to call it Winning Strategies for Successful Lawyer Advocacy and Mediation.
Try and say that 10 times.
Yeah, and included in these things were some of the charts, and there was an agenda, and we prepared a PowerPoint presentation for Judge Goldberg who flipped through the court rule and that sort of thing. We have a copy of this here. You're welcome to look at it during the break. But essentially, what we learned from there is what we kind of knew to begin with, because we've been working on this project in a sense since last summer, and that is they really don't know what's going on. And to the extent that they do know, they don't want to do it. And the resistance is the resistance that you find at the beginning of the process wherever you go in the country. The lawyers are fearful of it, clients want something better, judges are frustrated with what they're doing, and nobody knows how to put that together and create some kind of change. And when you talk about this concept of mediation, all that everybody really thinks about, or what their frame of reference is adversarialism. So the whole notion of converting a psychology from an adversarial combatant law concept to something that's collaborative and a counselor at law concept, while it's not foreign in terms of what you hear about, in terms of practice and experience, it's just not here. And what we've come to learn is that Chicago really is one of the toughest markets in the country. And in comparison to really most of the other major urban areas, with the exception of maybe New York City, Chicago's right down there toughest. You might be interested in knowing that New York City does not have the kind of thing that we're talking about that Cook County is just now introducing at the beginning of April. And you would think, well, my gosh, they're so cosmopolitan, they would, all this international influence, that they would know how to do it. But not really. DuPage County probably is far more advanced than New York City is in stuff, as well as Cook County. Anyhow, that's kind of the concept.
Texas, Florida, California, it's part of their culture. In Florida and California, all civil cases go to mediation. There's federal legislation floating around now to require mediation as a precondition to going to trial in a medical malpractice case, for example. So it's everywhere. You know it's in the globe. We've tried to mediate Israel. We've tried to mediate Bosnia. We're trying to mediate Iraq and Afghanistan. It's in the schools. Many of you may be familiar with peer resolution programs in the schools. Starting now, I learned from Ken Cook, nursery school, teaching 4-year-olds how to resolve conflict. How cute is that?
I don't think it's very cute at all. And I'll tell you why I don't think it's cute, because I have 3 children, 2 of which were peer mediators starting from elementary school. And the 2 boys got so successful at it that they were kind of the go-to, but their approaches were different. One was a big football player, and they threw him in with the toughest guys, and his approach was to tell them essentially that if you don't resolve this case, I'm going to kick the shit out of both of you. That was a little coercive, but you might say. But the other thing is it's dangerous, and I really think this is dangerous. And for those of you who have young children, including children-to-be, is that nothing can be done by fiat in your home anymore. It is no longer, whether it was ever valid, it is no longer valid to say, I'm your father and that's why you're going to do it. Everything is a negotiation.
So beware. But it's everywhere, and now we're happy to tell you that it's coming to Cook County, and we've given you, for those of you who need some sleeping elements at 3 in the morning, this is the proposed rule that the Supreme Court in Illinois has approved, and according to Judge Goldberg yesterday, they hope to have up and running as of April 5th. In Cook County. And there was, I'm sure, a lot of angst and discussion about the rules and the genesis of the rules and why these are the rules, and we're not going to bore you with all those details. Suffice it to say that at the table coming out of these rules were people from many different camps. Judge Goldberg was smart enough to bring in people who had very different perspectives. And he also took teams of people around the country to look at Coordinate's programs to see what was working in West Palm, in Texas, in Michigan. And out of that came these rules. They will probably get modified in time, but as of now, this is what the legal culture is going to be dealing with in major civil cases, and that definition is $30,000 in damages or more.
And you did have input. Some of your colleagues here who are present were very much instrumental in providing feedback and trying to keep them going down the right track, which at times I'm sure was quite a challenge. So, you got something happening here that's very dynamic, and there's going to be a lot of different kinds of emotions. In a sense, it's very exciting because you're going to get to see a transition from the inside looking out to how the whole rest of your city and the county operates, where you've been doing this already, and your reaction is, of course! And their reaction is,
That's true. We wanted to kind of get a little bit of the lay of the land from all of you. How many of you are not lawyers?
oh, that's refreshing.
Oh, God, is that terrific? God. Sorry, lawyers. I are one, so I can do that right now.
Yeah, I'm a recovering lawyer.
How many of you have had additional mediation training beyond what we would call the basic 40-hour program?
Well, they're going to know more than us.
I know, this is good. We'll bring them up here. How many do cases with lawyers present representing parties? Right? How many have done cases where they get paid? That's really what I want to know. Okay,
oh,
great.
good. And the rest of you who haven't, let's get
talk
going.
to those people. How many have done more than 10 cases in the last year? This is
great.
Fabulous.
That's great.
And how many have done cases that customarily last more than 4 hours? Good, you guys.
8 hours?
Yeah, Gatorade. Okay, great.
2 days?
Fabulous. This is
Multi-days?
terrific.
Multi-parties?
Fabulous.
Good cross-section.
Okay, what we're going to start with this morning is a case study. And we're going to kind of use it as the foundation of our program this morning when we talk about anticipating barriers and impasse. And we all know that when people come to mediation, they're already at impasse. They wouldn't be in mediation. But what the message we got from Stephanie and from the center was they didn't want to talk about that kind of impasse. They wanted to talk about the impasse that happens during the course of the mediation process.
And let me tell you something, I'll share a secret with you. I hope you don't mind me kind of
No.
going in here. One of the things that they had asked us to do yesterday as a closing segment was like mediator secrets revealed.
We didn't tell them.
Not to that group. To this group, we can talk about it.
Although Ken was there, just
Right.
keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, that's right. Don't say a thing.
But one of the tricks about impasse is anticipating impasse. So what we're going to give you is a fact scenario, and let's pretend that this is the mediator's summary that you get as a mediator coming into a case. I want to give you a few minutes to just get the lay of the facts, and then we're going to break you into small groups. And I'll repeat these instructions again, but what we're going to want you to do is, based upon what you know from this fact summary, we want you to identify some things that you might think are going to occur in this mediation that could cause the parties to come to impasse. So we're going to look forward and anticipate what might happen in this case, and then work on how we would use that anticipation to set up mediation so that you don't confront those things. So let's give you a few minutes to just kind of get familiar with the facts. We got to count heads and figure out how many we've got.
As we figure out what we're going to do next. done, look up or wave your hands or some symbol. Interpret is being done. Program, we're going to be dropping little questions that there is some little secrets, and we'll reveal those to you as we kind of go along. And so one of the questions is something you'll be able to use in your mediations at different times, select times. And the question is, and we'll give you the answer later, is why do men's shirts and jackets have buttons? We'll share that with Can't tell? We'll
Crucial
share that with you.
mediation to know that, though.
Right, that's right, that's
It'll be
right.
important, so you'll find it useful in mediation
Is
sometime.
it a German answer?
Okay, what we'd like to have you do is we'd like to have you sort of self-select into 5 groups around the flip charts. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if we have more people, maybe we'll take a 6th group, but 5 groups. And what we want you to do within your group is we want you to designate a scribe, someone who's going to write on the chart. We want you to designate someone who's going to be the synthesizer, because when we come back in mass, the synthesizer is going to be given 1 minute to summarize for the class the contents on the flip chart. And what we want to see on the flip chart are the things that you as a group have now, knowing Vito and Carla, or Carlo and Sophia, can anticipate will be some areas of impasse that might happen in this mediation. So are the instructions clear? Everybody got that? You need a scribe, a synthesizer, and a list of things that you anticipate could create impasse. All right? So why don't you self-congregate? I think we've got about 35 people, so that's about 5 or 6 a group.
And we'll kind of help you picture a little bit.
We'll have a group of about 6 or 7.
And we'll give you about 15 minutes.
I don't, but
I have a timer.
On the left.
You're it.
All right.
Clock the.
That's your turn. Sweep on the watch on this side of the
In the front, Patty, all those are open up there, of course.
Okay.
oh, that's even better.
Let's
Well, if you guys want to negotiate that, that's fine.
Feeling today. I
talk
know.
a little bit about the group dynamics.
You better listen up, be quiet, because she may be small, diminutive size, but she is a principal.
I repeat myself a lot, so.
Press start.
Let's talk about the group dynamics that you just went through. One of the things that Steve noticed was the formations that you all just naturally went to.
Any reason why that happened, and the particular formation? Did you notice what formation you took?
Circles.
Just as an aside, this is one of those little teaching techniques or something. The circle is considered by the ancients to be the perfect form, so that those of you who immediately gravitated to forming a circle, you're on your way to self-realization. On the other hand, that would be a very difficult exercise for lawyers to undertake.
All lawyers.
Most likely,
All lawyers.
right, most likely they would align themselves this way in rows,
Are you saying they wouldn't get into circles?
Probably
Probably
not,
not.
not as naturally as
not
you
as
did.
naturally. Would not have grabbed, nor, what was the other point?
Nor would they be as collaborative in their conversations. Their forcefulness of the training that they go through as litigators and as advocates often forces them to want to take control of an exercise. And they all are, it's like everybody trying to get through the gate at the same time. They all want to talk and you want everybody else to listen.
The other side of that is many times they'll just wait and do nothing, looking for the ambush. So that we can see what everybody else is doing, and then when they see where everyone else, where the lay of the land is, then they'll put themselves in a strategically advantaged place and move from there.
So one of the things we want you to be aware of is the dynamics of something that came so easily to you and was so natural to you versus someone who hasn't been through the training, is untrusting of the process, untrusting of the people, and has much skepticism and basic fear about coming into a process. They're not only distrusting of the process, they're distrusting of the people.
So they're not only at impasse because of the nature of the conflict, but when they walk into the room, that impasse is being enhanced by the personalities, the backgrounds, the professional orientations. Say nothing about the nature of the conflict itself. So, where do you put yourself in this group? Sometimes we do something that's called an aggression line. We say, okay, what we want you to do is to line up. You start from this end of the wall with the people who feel like they're the least aggressive and those who are the most aggressive down there. And oftentimes, instead of finding a nice, neat line going all the way this way, you start finding a battle towards the front, not back. And people are starting to line up laterally
Because they're the same.
because they don't want anyone to get ahead of them. So before you know it, you have everyone's nose is against the wall, and you got 6 people lined up against the wall looking that way.
So, be cognizant of that dynamic in any mediation. And Eckhart Tolle writes a book called The Power of the Now. And one of the things when you get into higher levels of mediation training and mediation work is the idea of being present in the moment. Len Riskin has written Mindfulness in Mediation, Meditation. Back when we started this, that people got the T's and the I's mixed up. In fact, I'll tell you a great anecdote. One of our first Core to Next programs was in a county called Kent County over in Grand Rapids. And they developed all their programs, and they got all of their court forms and put them on email so that they would be available on the web. And they hired a software company to prepare all the forms and put them up on the web. The very first court-ordered case that came out of Kent County, because my last name starts with A, the parties couldn't agree on the mediator, and the first person appointed to the case was me. I got the court order, and it says they were ordered to voluntary meditation. So I started mediation saying, okay, we're all gonna hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
It worked.
Yeah. So part of being aware is being present. Wherever you are, be there. Now, let's ask this question. By what method did you and your groups decide who was going to be the scribe?
Intimidation.
Okay, intimidation. Okay, what else?
Ownership
Ownership of
tool.
that. Okay.
Okay.
What else?
Proximity to the board.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was,
Okay.
Okay. Proximity to the board. Volunteer.
Volunteer. Volunteer.
Anybody get dictated default? Okay.
She left for a minute, so we assigned it.
Yeah. Absolute responsibility.
We did a semi-reverse dictation here.
So I reverse dictation?
Yeah, suggested that 2 people other than me should be the one. So it was kind of a reverse dictation.
And that was a kind of a manipulation in itself now, wasn't it?
yes.
But it all worked because you all got the task done. So what's the thought process about that is that you each had your own methodology of how that task was going to get accomplished, and you didn't all necessarily use the same one or agree that it should be the same process, and yet you were able to achieve the goal. Same thing with, how did you pick the synthesizer? How'd you like to synthesize?
Volunteer.
It's volunteer,
Volunteer.
okay.
Someone volunteered. You're in.
Got volunteer. So, again, recognize that you're coming at it from different ideas and different expectations, but by looking forward to the task that has to be accomplished, you were able to get there as opposed to staying anchored in your idea or your thought.
And when you walk into the room, or those people walk into the room to do your meditation, part of a potential impasse factor, one that usually gets by very quickly, but is where people sit. And where's the board going to go? And where are you going to sit? And I think that's one of the reasons why you are given a framework in your mediation training as to how you want people to sit. And so you give them direction, and generally they'll follow your direction. I have the client sit closer to the people, the real people, and then the fake people, the lawyers, you know, are kind of a little bit further away. So you give them, you're raking the first potential concern about a problem, which could translate into impasse. If they had no direction from you, what would they know what to do? How would they sit? Where would they situate? They all, would you notice when you come into the room, they always kind of look at you? You know, where should I sit? Is this okay to sit here? They don't know. They're looking for some direction. Isn't that kind of evaluative on your part? I thought this was facilitative mediation. You're from the very beginning, you're telling them what they're going to do. They're looking to you already to give them direction.
So you are in essence the conductor. Yes, ma'am.
But aren't you really, I mean, people will gravitate to a comfort zone if they can possibly find one. You know, and they may have to bring it with them. And so if you're doing this with lawyers, then, and you don't tell them where to sit, then they'll put their lawyer, and their lawyer will want to go right to the seat next to you.
That's
So you
exactly
really
right.
have to tell them, you have to create the comfort zone in which they can do. So it's not as directional as it is structural.
Right.
Sometimes we address that in a technique that we use, because it's mostly situations with lawyers that we work with, and I think increasingly you're going to find that because of the new courtroom, and that is we use a pre-mediation conference call. And some of the things we talk about with the lawyers are simply the logistics and the seating in the room, and we will say, you know, because we want to hear from your clients and we would like to have them feel free to talk, we would like to have them, we're going to sit the room in a certain way, and we're telling you how that's going to be. We'd like to have the client sitting closest to us, and then please feel free to sit next to them on the other side. So when they come into the room, that's already a decision that's made. And lawyers like decisions. You know, they like things that are decided, they like certainty, they like structure. So you're helping them give that structure, and that's relieving part of that discomfort. Looking for a comfort zone, lawyers come in knowing exactly what they're expected to do, where they're supposed to sit. You walk into the courtroom, they know they're supposed to rise when the judge comes in. They know that there's a couple of counsel tables up front. When their case is called, they go there.
And one goes on one side, one goes on the other.
Right. And while they're waiting, they sit in the back pews. So they're used to a kind of structure. Don't feel resistant or reluctant at all to work with that kind of structure when you're working with lawyers. It's an expectation that they have. It's a need that they have.
What would be the impact if you just didn't give them the answer?
Fun.
You mean if you didn't direct their seating?
Yeah, let them flounder. Watch it.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and use it wherever you like.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing. Human behavior never ceases to amaze me. But my experience is that if you have lawyers present in the mediation, they will automatically, almost universally, plop themselves down in the chair closest to you. And they will self-select which side of the table they want. If this side looks out the window, and this side looks at the wall, or this side. I mean, it's amazing how quick they move to that.
And interestingly, they generally don't care which side of the table they are, just so long as they are situating themselves closest to the mediator. So that's not an issue as to which side of the table.
It's just, you know, the seat. And this is not a day to bash lawyers. I mean, I love lawyers. I'm married to a lawyer. My father's a lawyer. But they bring a dynamic. They bring a dynamic to the process that as mediators we not only have to respect and understand, but then we got to figure out how to work with it. So a lot of today is talking about the dimensions that brings to conflict, not only vis-a-vis you, but also lawyer-client and all of those things that are going on in a mediation. Yes, ma'am?
Have you ever met resistance when you ask parties to sit?
I've had a guy, I said, would you sit here, would your client sit here? And he said, no, I'd rather sit here.
What do you do?
Let him sit there. I'm
I
not
show
gonna
them the
pick a
door,
fight.
say, hey, my way or the highway.
I'm not gonna pick the fight early,
Yeah.
you know, if ever. And I just say, whatever your client, I said to him, whatever your client's most comfortable with.
And you know how lemmings just kind of run to the sea? Once one lawyer who raises that point then situates himself the other way, then the other lawyer will automatically do the same.
thing.
So they're still on, they've created a level playing field for each other. So you're not causing a problem if you just simply say, okay, you know, do what you want.
Going back to your comment that Impasse is immediately created just by who we are, our background as mediators, what the perception of what we're bringing in. Besides the seating, what does one do about that right from the start? You know, there's going to be this impasse.
Well, again, part of today is anticipating those things and having tools to cope with those potential things. The fact that we've just had this discussion about seating is going to give you some choice points. One of the things that,
Ms. Allen, I'm very glad to see that you're here, you and your client, and this is an opportunity where I hope everyone will be able to work things out. We have the conference room over here. What we're going to do is we're going to situate people comfortably. What my preference would be if you have your client sit closest to me, and then you can sit directly to the other side of your client.
Sure.
Does that work for you?
yeah, thanks. I'm probably not going to say no to him, because I need him on my side, I don't want to alienate him. So if you can have a script or some choice words that you can use in your arsenal of techniques, and know that that could be a problem, and know how you're going to handle it, you've already avoided the first problem. You make choices as mediators. You make macro choices and micro choices. And the macro choice is, I want to seat the clients next to me. The micro choice is, how do I do it? How do I accomplish that? And so Steve's demonstration is one methodology. When you have multi-parties, I sometimes use table cards, name tags. Table tags. We do permanency planning with lots of parties, social workers and counselors and parents and foster parents, and we just put name cards. Now, somebody clever might go in and move them, creates a problem.
I glue mine to the table.
You know, we think about the table we're going to use. In Star Wars, there was a mediation in Star Wars where the table was triangular. And in many respects, we all think we want a circular table, but in some respects, it's kind of like the triangle, because the triangle is equal-sided and everybody's, if you only have 3 people, you've got the, you know, the parity.
There's also kind of a closed, it is the closest thing you can get to the circle, as opposed to having them lined up in rows. A case that I did 2 weeks ago, there were lots of people, and when everyone first walked into this kind of big ballroom, the hotel had lined up the tables like this, and I talked to the 2 lawyers and said, we don't like it. They didn't like it, I didn't like it. So first we tried to move the tables close together. This is before the parties came in. We still felt that that wasn't comfortable. And so what we did is we just took one end and made it kind of a triangle like that, and so it came out into a V. They were collaborating already, simply on the seating. So you kind of got them into the spirit. They didn't want it that way. I didn't want it that way. There seemed to be a common ground that they instantaneously saw, and so we began we started our mediation at that point by building some kind of collaborative activity.
Somebody had a question over there, sir.
I guess I'm really not connecting the dots as to why that's important. Why is it important that the participants and not the lawyer be seated next to you? And it may be the lawyer in the
Well, that's okay. For those of you who have the same problem, you're going to have to go to a room over here. It's going to be the elementary
Yeah, we're gonna go
program.
through psychoanalysis before
That's
we
right.
get
It's for the lawyers only.
It's important for a couple reasons, and again, this is one of those choice points. You may disagree with this, and that's okay. You all know that mediation is not a science, it's an art, and you find your own personal voice, you find your own methodologies, and they work for you. And they probably work pretty well most of the time. What happens when you see an advocate or a representative close to the mediator, let me just show you. Steve, you be the mediator. You be my client.
Excuse my bad.
I'm going to sit like this to him. Now she's out of the picture, and yet she's the decision maker. The other thing that happens is I do this, and I talk to her like this. Now I've offended him, put my back to him, and now I make her feel like she's disconnected from the mediator.
The whole conversation is going this way.
Goes this way.
Which is exactly the triangle with the lawyers and the mediator that you don't want, because that's what you have in the courtroom. You know, that's your adversarial context.
The other thing is, as a mediator, my line of vision, my closest line of vision is what's closest to me. And so it's much easier for me to position a chair where I can turn just a little bit this way, or turn just a little bit this way, as opposed to doing this. You know, leaning over the lawyer to talk to the person, to hand them a document, to relate to them. So it's just easier for me to have the decision makers with me, because ultimately at the end of the day, whether there's lawyers or not, they are the decision makers. And so I have to get that rapport going right off the bat.
Could I make a slight suggestion here, by
Yes.
the way, because I wound up with this problem. what I call the peripheral vision too close problem.
Right.
If the people right next to you are too close to you, you got a multiple problem. You can't watch the other one while you're looking at the one on your peripheral vision.
Exactly.
So whoever you have near you, don't get them too near. They gotta be out enough that while you're looking at one, theoretically, out of the corner of your eye, you can see the reactions to the other. So watch out they don't, whoever it is, doesn't
Yeah.
get too close to you. I got jammed that way and figured out how to get my chair back.
It's like tennis
I'm not
match.
gonna see 'em.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing this.
Perhaps one final point, hopefully this will close the dots on this for you, and that is, it's very symbolic in terms of the nature of the process that lawyers are bringing to mediation, that they sit closest to you where the action is, because in the trial, in the litigation framework, they are the designers, the producers, the executives, the choreographers, the costume people, they write the scripts, and the client is merely one of the actors that gets directed.
I mean,
So the
think about
client
TV.
recedes to the background in terms of significance in the litigation process, and often you'll hear that the clients feel like they're kind of an afterthought in the litigation, and that the real stars, who are the stars in television? When you see the lawyer shows? The clients come and bring the problem, but the whole storyline really focuses on the lawyer interaction, isn't it?
So I hope that gives you some ideas. Let's talk again
Is that
before.
too much information?
Before we debrief, did you have some disagreements in your group about what you thought was an impasse? You're saying yes. And how did that come up and how did you resolve it? You mediated.
It came up because somebody said something that somebody else disagreed with,
Okay.
and then we just talked about it, and either people had a way of translating or modifying what somebody was saying, and it ended up on the list, or was talked about, and it was just kind of generally agreed that that wasn't as significant, or it wasn't too on point, and we went on from it.
So there was some exercise of group censorship as to what should be put up on the board?
Yes.
Isn't something that we're told, you don't censor any of the proposals?
But was there also, the two people that disagreed, what caused you to change your perspective so that the group could get that put up on the board?
Sorry, we're picking on you.
Essentially, it's probably in some cases just reframing the
Okay.
point in a way that we
Excellent.
could all
So the
identify
technique was
with.
reframing it, technique was sharing information, giving an opportunity to look at perspectives. And you do it naturally. You don't even realize,
about it.
as trained mediators, that you're doing it.
And those are impasse
Those are techniques.
breaking techniques.
Those are techniques.
So try to be cognizant that you're actually doing them. That you're actually doing things as a mediator that may be in your muscles already, that are oriented towards avoiding impasse or breaking it if it actually exists.
Okay, now we've got our timekeepers. We've got you over here, and we've got, who's got the timer over here? Okay. What we want the synthesizers to do, and we're going to start in this group in the corner, because I heard them say about 5 minutes before we're done that they were ready to go. So that's how I determined we're going to
All
start
these
with
big
them.
city people.
And those of you that were the scribes, what we want you to do is stand next to your list, and what we don't want to do is repeat the same points or messages. So if somebody who comes before you has talked about something that's on your list, we want you to check it off on your list, so that when your synthesizer comes up, we don't repeat what we've already heard. So the guys that go first, the synthesizer has, now we want, who's our timekeeper? Okay, you're gonna keep time for this side of the room, and you're gonna keep time for that side of the room.
How long do we have?
1 minute, 1 minute.
All right.
So the guy that goes last is probably gonna be pretty lucky. You guys are trying to do that. So whenever you're ready.
I'd like to say I was volunteered in my absence. So I'd like to thank everyone for this fine opportunity. All right,
Okay.
should I start?
Yes.
Okay, we thought some impasse items would be the issue of who might move if it comes to that, generational differences that play out in lots of different ways, and the fact, scenario, lifestyle and physical needs, the fact that there are two different lifestyles, different physical needs. We feel that the issue of the shared driveway is certainly an impasse point, values and perceptions of what might be loud, the level of anger that has already escalated, issues of inability to see that there may be shared contribution and responsibility for the problems that have developed. Also, questions about the abilities or methods of resolving a future incident, questions of lack of respect going both ways, and perceptions of entitlements.
Great. Some of you have some things you checked off on your list. Now, let me ask the group. Was there anything that, what's your name? Mark? Within this group, was there anything that Marge said that she didn't repeat in the way that you understood the way it went up on the board?
Could you speak up?
Okay, sorry. The question I put to the group was there anything that Marge said in reframing and rephrasing what's on that chart that wasn't what you thought the item or the message was on the board within that group? Anybody in the group think she didn't rephrase or reframe the way that you thought it should be? Okay. One of the things we teach is, that you reframe and rephrase, and you always sort of think you're doing it right, but we all know that sometimes we don't get it. And so often when we do this exercise, somebody says, well, no, that's not really what we meant by that. So even though you've put it up and you reach consensus on the words, you're still working with the interpretation. All right, how about someone from this side? How about in the back room over there? Who's your synthesizer?
One of the things was talking about lack of objective standards, so how the impasse in terms of what's loud, what's not loud. The parties being focused on the positions and not the needs and interests and getting at the needs and interests. Sort of talking about what they were talking about, some of the cultural differences, being an owner versus a tenant, how long you've lived there versus how long you haven't lived there. We thought there'd be an impasse around the implied and explicit threats to each other. That one of the Vivianos, according to the case scenario, might be missing from the table, and that would be I need to talk to my husband, I need to talk to my wife before, in terms of authority to settle. The elderly couple's fear of change and investment in the status quo, the way things are, again, that goes back to I've lived here longer than you. That right now there's no perceived common ground or interests, and then different conflict styles in terms of the elderly couple becoming more sort of aggressive in how they're dealing with the conflict versus the tenant who's not dealing with it in a different way.
Group, how'd she do? She captured the essence of your...
Perfect.
Great. How'd she do on time? You doing very well. These guys are great on time. Okay.
Do you guys think they did a very good job? Give my hand.
All right. Why don't we hear from this group up here?
Well, we've got the cultural expectations, but we've also got the fact that they're all Italian. And so you've got an additional dimension where you've got the sense of entitlement due to their age and the fact that in Italian culture, and this is an ethnic neighborhood, they need that respect. That's part of what they're also going through grieving because their old neighbor died. And so they've got this new kid who came in and just took that away from them. You've got the situation that we've had the little apparent room for compromise. We've already had the parking area and the lifestyle, but we've got the noise during the day and night, which normally, you can make some kind of an agreement, and that's a little more difficult. We've got the assumption of guilt on both parties that the other party has done something wrong. And then we've got a lack of a positive interaction. It doesn't seem to be that there were any cookies delivered when this kid moved in, and it doesn't sound like he offered to shovel the driveway in the winter. So we've got a lack of a relationship in general here that we're building on, and no past relationship because he is a tenant, and you've got the kid's sense of freedom, his independence, his entitlement. So you've got the landowner entitlement, but you've also got the young person who's just coming out into his own entitlement. And I'm sure that also deals with the perspectives and what they feel that they should have. I think that's it.
Group, how'd you do? Okay? Great. Okay, Who we got over here?
There's an applause meter here, so
Okay.
And I'll admit, because this is continuum stuff and different ways of characterizing, but I got the feeling that we're getting off of what are the impasse points to what are we going to deal with? I mean, which is slightly different, in other words, the characterization as such.
Well,
You kind of jump to a next stage.
Okay, so what we had from our synthesizer was not only the point, but the explanation and the rationale or the reasoning behind it. And one of the things that we as mediators often do, and I'm guilty of this, is make a statement, but we have to explain or do it all to get it all out. So instead of using 10 words to do something, we use 50. And sometimes that's a very necessary thing, but what's interesting about this dynamic was, and your name is? Christine. She felt, well, what did you feel in terms of giving that explanation? What was your sense of your thinking and why you did that?
Because everybody has already touched everything else, so all I can do is add another detail to kind of flesh it out a little bit more.
Okay, all right.
Now, there's a difference, of course, between explaining what you think somebody has said versus reframing what they've said. Follow the difference? The explaining what somebody else said involves your own conscious interpretation, your cultural background, all the other baggage or enlightenment that you bring, versus reframing, which is the mechanical process of trying to select words that reframe in so-called neutral language. And we as mediators try to do that, and frankly, in trainings, there's this page, here's the neutral words. Okay, use those. And so, I mean, if you're a real good mediator, that's, you use those neutral words. You stray off that page and you go over here, what am I doing?
Yeah, I don't have the tools, I don't have the method. Yes?
Could you center us a little more? When you asked us to list impasse items, what do you actually mean by impasse?
Well, here's the secret. We wanted you to decide what you think impasse is.
That's the next part of the...
Next part of this.
Good.
Good, you're way ahead of us as usual.
Yeah, and we'd like you to stand out. For the two of you guys,
You're going to
now.
third grade now. You're already.
Trouble makes it easier to get rid of right away.
Okay, how about this group right here? You got our timer ready? Okay.
Yep, ready.
Go ahead.
Well, people have covered most of the big points that we talked about. The things that I would add to what have already been discussed are, we talked a little bit about the damage issue, and we classified it as well, we talked about it in terms of an argument about who did it. There was going to be an accusation on one side, on the elderly couple's side, that, you know, you did this, and he obviously is going to deny that, and that would create a factual impasse right off the bat. We also talked about the communication and really just a complete failure to do so at this point. It sounds like it started out pretty bad at the beginning and has gone from bad to throwing things at each other out in the yard when the soccer ball goes across into the other yard. So there's absolutely no communication, and through lack of communication, there's a complete inability to understand the needs and interests that are behind both parties in this situation.
Time. Okay, all right.
Good job, Nate.
Okay, group, did he capture some of your explanations for what's on your list? Did he leave some things out?
No, because again, other people
Okay.
have them, so yes, he did, but he was supposed to.
Okay, all right. Okay, we got one more group over here. Okay,
Learning well.
yes, ma'am. Oh, no, I got this one and this one. You're gonna make us go last.
It's getting harder and harder to tell you later.
There's always a reason.
We had a little different take because we started by talking about what do you mean by addressing things in the sense of what your impact, what would be impacted, whereas we're used to addressing it as what are issues, and that's how the impact rises to the surface. So that was a primary issue. We have just a couple of things left otherwise. One thing was, and it goes with the Italian culture issue, is was the mediator Italian?
Could you speak up?
Was the mediator Italian? And what all did that bring? We talked about non-present parties also, and you mentioned non-present parties that Mr. and Mrs. were not both going to be there, but also their relatives weren't going to be there, the kids' friends weren't going to be there, the owner of the other unit wasn't going to be there. Length of lease was mentioned because that was really in the context of renter versus owner.
Okay.
Rights, and then language kind of went with the cultural issue more than communication is, would the youngster, would the young man be able to to use language appropriate and communicate in that sense with the older generation. And we put down legal issues. And I think that was because you said list these as impacts, not as issues.
Okay, great. How'd she do, Brooke? You get it for you? Okay, good, thank you. What's interesting is that in talking about language, and your name is? Rosalind assumed that when she heard about cultural expectations, she tied that to this language point that she was trying to make and felt it had already been covered to some extent. I want to ask the group, is that the way that you viewed the language you're saying? You're shaking your head no.
Well, we didn't fine tune this, but what I recall was that we were saying that you've got an ethnic Italian of an older generation, you've got a younger man who may or may not have any relationship to that. And so just what language they use to explain things or talk about things may provide communication, maybe another issue.
First, second generation.
Yeah, because what one person says may be heard entirely differently, and so you may have to.
Different value systems.
Yeah, you may have to do a lot of framing to make sure everybody's hearing and seeing.
So what, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it actually depends on which way it goes. I mean, they could all be in sync. It could be reversed. It could be that the older people are highly, for want of a better word, Americanized, anglicized,
Right.
something like that. And it could be that the person who rented just came over from Naples. So
I don't know. So what's interesting is even though you thought you had consensus, there's still a difference of perspective on what that consensus is. And the assumptions that we make as mediators sometimes get us in trouble and create the impasse, even though we think we're all on the same page.
Because
Yes,
I
ma'am.
actually thought that before someone else told me what they thought the group meant by it, I actually thought the language would be encompassed in the communication issue.
Okay, all right, so, okay, great. Now, let's go over here. You've got a whole minute.
Come up with something new.
My group made my job really easy because as a group of fine mediators, we kept asking, what do you mean by that, reframing it, and synthesizing the whole thing for me. So the thing that we noticed, though, that was a little difference in the age difference that people mentioned was a parent-child dynamic might be going on. And what would that cause? I'm looking for that.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, now we gotta stop time because you interrupted her a minute.
I'll explain it in a minute. The assumptions about education might be there. There might be a very large education dynamic that we want to find out. About physical abilities in terms of the parking space, was that going to cause some difficulty for either of them? And then that they had principles. They were, both of them felt they were principally right and how that principal position. And that there had been some name calling. In terms of the emotional escalation, people talked about that, but name calling had really gotten in, and even prejudgment of emotion, of motivation, had gotten into that escalation. Thank you very much,
Did you get it all,
for making
Brooke?
my job easier.
Yeah, okay, good, good. So Steve has been writing up here a number of things that you all have raised in your comments. One of the things that I think is interesting is, and here's an assumption that I as a mediator listening to this am going to make, and I might be wrong and I might be right. There was an assumption in some of the comments that the damage to the sculptures were caused by the neighbor. But do you really know?
We assumed that.
Yeah, you assumed that.
No, we assumed there was property damage.
No, we didn't assume
Who
that.
caused it.
Some people assume that he had been the causer, and if I can't, I thought it was over here. But that's one of the things in this fact pattern that's interesting. In the real case, it was people at the party who had gone over because they knew he was having trouble with his neighbors, and they had gone over and destroyed the sculpture, and he didn't even know about it. He didn't know it. The other assumption I heard somebody say was the soccer ball in the yard, that it had gone into the soccer ball, and the statement was the assumption that it hadn't been intentional. You don't know. So even in something as simple as a one-page set of facts, we have spent 35 minutes talking about what we think might happen when these people come to the table. Makes you wonder how the heck this process ever even begins to work, doesn't it? I mean, aren't you just worn out by now? I mean, it's like all this sensory stuff coming at you.
And we were working simply on one sense, year 5, which was visual. So we asked you to read something and then take that in using your visual sense and then process it. Now, when you're there sitting at the table, you may or may not have summaries in advance. So what is the other sense that you're using most often? Listening. And so you go through this whole process of active listening. It's on a spectrum of using your senses as to the information that's coming in. And one of the things that can create impasse is blockage of your own senses or filtering your own senses. And I look around the room, I see, people with those, glasses. I wear both, unfortunately, so I'm doubly troubled, contacts and this. And the metaphor is that, this filter is my experience through life. When lawyers go or have cases in trial, they sometimes will explain to their client that what the jury will do is they will filter through their own personal experience what they hear from the witness stand. And that's why you get sometimes 3 versions. It's the version of the plaintiff, the defendant, and what the jury or judge hears. And sometimes the parties are shocked because the judge or the jury comes up with a completely different solution or interpretation of what happened. When you're looking and reading something, you're processing a certain way. When you're listening, you're processing a certain way. At each of those points, you also have a feeling, just a body feeling. It's the tactile, and some people would call it intuition, but the tactile is only one part of your intuition. Intuition functions on the basis of all of your senses, plus some other evolutionary development that we have. And all of this information coming in, what do you do with it? And you know the term transparency. Mediators should remain as transparent as possible. And that is not filter what they're hearing, not making assumptions, not drawing conclusions, not making judgments upon the information. A daunting task that is almost impossible to perform for any human being. So part of what this exercise is also all about, in addition to the questions that we were asking you about who made the decisions to do this, that, and the other thing, is to draw to your attention that you do things subconsciously without even knowing them. Your training as mediators has brought some of those things to the forefront of your awareness, and so you can understand them. And when you're doing the mediation, you're cognizant and you're focusing on those. But there's a whole lot of other things, factors that can enter into a possible picture for impasse breaking that are external. These are all external. These are from the story problem. But so much of it comes back to you as the mediator, and we're not sharing anything that's rocket science or new to you, but our experience after a while is, you can follow these structures, the training that you've gotten, but ultimately, what is it that tells you what direction to go in a case? Your gut, your intuition, and things just pop out. They happen. It's like the magic of mediation. And that's not something very, very difficult to explain to people who are not schooled in it to the extent that you are. So part of the refinement of this so-called advanced training is to hopefully refine even more your awareness of those factors that can influence you internally